It's December 19th, 2024, and the US government is on the brink of yet another shutdown. This isn't just a procedural hiccup, it's a high stakes battle with far reaching consequences. Welcome to Politics Explained, where we deliver unbiased, unfiltered, and understandable analyses of today's most pressing issues.
I'm Bill, bringing you a critical look at the strategies, motivations, and outcomes shaping our political landscape.
And I'm Jen, diving into the human stories behind the headlines and connecting the dots to the bigger picture.
Today, we're not just breaking down the current shutdown drama. We're also taking a deeper look at lessons from the past, focusing on the 2018 to 2019 shutdown, its key players, and how it compares to what's happening now.
We'll analyze who stands to gain, who risks losing, and how this cycle of dysfunction keeps repeating. And let's see what insights we can gain that might help prevent shutdowns in the future.
So buckle up, because this is more than just politics. It's about the systems that shape our lives. Let's dive in.
Before we dive into the political analysis, let's take a closer look at the bipartisan bill that was supposed to prevent this mess. Bill, what was in the proposal?
It was a sweeping bill designed to address several key issues, including border security, immigration reform, and international aid. It proposed increasing funding for border personnel and streamlining asylum processing. It also offered pathways to legal status for certain groups, like documented dreamers.
And it wasn't just about immigration, right? What else did it include?
Exactly. The bill also allocated $60 billion for Ukraine and $14 billion for Israel, aiming to address both domestic and international priorities. It was an attempt to create a balanced package that could appeal to lawmakers on both sides.
So, what went wrong? Why couldn't it pass?
Trump called it a highly sophisticated trap and claimed it undermined border security. His public opposition rallied many Republicans to reject the bill, even though it included provisions for increased enforcement and a border emergency mechanism to close the border during surges.
But wasn't that claim about allowing 5,000 illegal crossings a misrepresentation?
It was. The bill aimed to prevent surges by capping crossings at that number before triggering emergency measures. But by the time the facts were clarified, the damage to the bill's reputation was already done.
And Musk? He's an influential player in this shutdown. What role did he play here?
Musk used his platform, X, to rally Republican opposition. He targeted moderate Republicans, warning them of primary challenges if they supported the bill. His involvement made it nearly impossible for centrists to back the proposal without risking political fallout.
What about Democrats? How did they approach the bill?
Centrist Democrats saw it as a practical compromise and largely supported it. Progressives, however, criticized it for not doing enough to protect immigrant rights and limit corporate influence. While their disagreements were real, they were overshadowed by the GOP's outright rejection.
So this wasn't just about partisanship. It became a battleground for much larger ideological fights.
Absolutely. Even well-crafted bipartisan efforts can collapse when political polarization and external influences take center stage.
And now, that collapse has brought us to where we are today. Let's move into the analysis. If this revised spending bill passes, who comes out ahead?
If it passes, it's a win for Trump. It reinforces his role as a decisive leader capable of rallying his party. Speaker Mike Johnson also gains credibility for managing GOP divisions effectively.
And the Democrats?
Centrist Democrats could claim a minor victory for pragmatism, appealing to moderates and independents. But progressives might argue that the compromise doesn't address systemic issues, potentially alienating their base.
What happens if the shutdown goes ahead, though? How does the narrative shift?
Trump risks losing momentum if the public sees it as a failure of leadership, but his base will likely frame it as a necessary stand against the swamp. For Democrats, it becomes a battle of messaging. Progressives will spotlight GOP dysfunction, while centrists risk being seen as part of the gridlock.
And Musk? How does a shutdown fit into his larger strategy?
Musk stands to benefit either way. A shutdown strengthens his narrative about government inefficiency, bolstering support for his Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. But critics see this as prioritizing corporate agendas over public welfare.
So, Democrats are in a tricky position. Are they able to influence this outcome?
Not directly. Their diminished influence after the 2024 elections limits their leverage, but their messaging still matters. Centrists are trying to highlight the human cost of a shutdown, while progressives are framing it as a symptom of larger systemic failures.
So, who wins and who loses in all of this?
If the shutdown is avoided, Trump, the GOP, and Musk emerge as winners. Democrats may come out neutral, with centrists making small gains. But if the shutdown happens, progressives and Musk gain platforms to push their narratives. Ultimately, though, the American public is always the biggest loser in these situations.
And that's the recurring story, isn't it? Shutdowns might serve political strategies, but the real costs are always borne by the people. Up next, we'll dig deeper into how we got here by examining lessons from the last government shutdown. We've talked about the current shutdown, but let's step back for a moment. Bill, the last government shutdown back in 2018 to 2019 was the longest in U.S. history. How does it compare to what we're seeing today?
Good question, Jin. The last shutdown lasted 35 days, and it centered around funding for President Trump's border wall. The Democrats, led by Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, refused to approve $5.7 billion in wall funding, arguing it was ineffective and a misuse of taxpayer money. Sound familiar?
It does, but there are some big differences this time. Back in 2018, Congress was split, with Democrats controlling the House. Now, Republicans have full control of Congress and can't point fingers across the aisle the same way.
Exactly. The dynamics were different. In 2018, Trump used the shutdown to energize his base by framing the wall as a non-negotiable national security issue. He was willing to let federal workers go unpaid to make a point.
But that strategy came with risks. Public opinion polls blamed Trump and the GOP for the shutdown, and while it might have shored up his base, it hurt him with moderates and independents. Do you think this time will play out the same way?
It's possible, but there's a twist this time. Elon Musk. Back in 2018, it was a purely political fight. Now, we've got corporate power in the mix, with Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, advocating for spending cuts and efficiency reforms.
So Musk has added a layer of complexity, but his influence might also be polarizing. Some see his involvement as corporate overreach. Others view him as the only one trying to fix inefficiency.
And don't forget the broader scope of issues in this shutdown. The rejected bipartisan bill wasn't just about border security. It included disaster relief, aid for Ukraine and Israel, and provisions for immigration reform. The stakes feel higher because the issues are more global.
That's a good point. Let's go deeper into the lessons from the 2018 shutdown. For Trump, it was about fulfilling a campaign promise. How did that play out?
It was a mixed bag. Short term, it strengthened his base, who saw him as a fighter. But long term, he failed to secure wall funding through the shutdown and ended up reopening the government without any major wins. It made him look inflexible to moderates.
And Democrats? How did they come out of it?
Pretty strong, actually. Pelosi and Schumer were able to present themselves as the adults in the room. They emphasized the shutdown's human cost, like the 800,000 federal workers who went unpaid, and framed the wall as a distraction from real immigration reform.
But here's the thing, shutdowns don't just harm politicians' reputations. They have real-world impacts. The 2018 shutdown cost the economy $11 billion, and $3 billion of that was permanently lost. That's not just numbers, it's people's livelihoods.
True. And those impacts echo into the current situation. If this shutdown happens, federal workers will be furloughed again, critical services will pause, and the economic damage could be even worse with today's inflation rates.
Let's talk comparisons. What are the key differences between then and now?
Well, for starters, the GOP is in full control now. Back then, they could blame Democrats for stalling in the House. This time, they own the outcome, and the pressure's on them to deliver.
And then there's Musk. Back in 2018, it was purely about Trump's demands. Now, Musk's role in shaping Republican priorities adds a new dimension. His push for drastic spending cuts might resonate with fiscal conservatives, but it risks alienating moderate voters.
And let's not forget the bipartisan bill. In 2018, the shutdown was narrowly focused on the wall. This year's bill addressed broader issues like foreign aid and immigration reform, making the stakes more complex.
So, what insights can we take from all this? If history is any guide, shutdowns rarely produce clear winners, but they always create losers, primarily the American public.
Agreed. The lesson here is that shutdowns are high-stakes gambles. Politicians might think they're playing chess, but in the end, it's federal workers and citizens who pay the price.
And with that, we're going to wrap up our segment today. Shutdowns are more than political chess games. They have real impacts on people, from federal workers going unpaid to the ripple effects on local businesses and families. And yet, here we are again, asking the same question: how do we fix this?
As we've discussed, the players in this shutdown, Trump, Musk, Democrats, and Republicans, are all pursuing their own agendas. But at the end of the day, the biggest losers are the American public.
So now we turn it over to you, our listeners. What's your take? Could solutions like automatic funding extensions, which would keep the government running at current levels during deadlocks, or biennial budgets, which focus on long-term planning every 2 years, be the key? Or do we need a more fundamental change in how Congress operates?
Head to the comments section or take part in our community poll. Your voice matters. And if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
This is Politics Explained, where neutrality meets clarity and critical thinking. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.